Hello, and welcome to a podcast about leadership brought to you by AIIR Consulting. I'm Tom Fox, your host. In this episode, we're exploring the impact of AI on leadership with Bruce Katz, providing expert insights to help us navigate this evolving landscape. Bruce is a self-proclaimed introverted researcher, fascinated by human thought, emotion, and workplace success. He's transitioned from studying cognition and learning's neural bases on applying machine learning for behavior prediction. Bruce has contributed extensively, including publications on aesthetics, the mind-body problem, and books on digital design and mind digitation. His work aims to meld human intuition and artificial intelligence, enhancing professional excellence. Sound like you're our best person to talk to, Bruce. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, Bruce, we talked a little bit and we've worked a little bit at AIR, and the more AI comes up, we look at it in our work and the way we use it, it's ever evolving. And I see these stats that come out all the time. I was doing some research a few days ago. 64% of businesses expect AI to increase productivity. 400 million workers could be displaced by 2030. But 97 million jobs could be created as a result of AI. And there's plenty more statistics out there. It just seems to be this Wild West kind of situation right now. And part of our conversation today is, it is a hot topic. And I was hoping that part of what you could do is walk us through its journey, talking about some of the milestones we've had in AI and where we're at right now, and probably more importantly, where are we going?
I think one of the best ways of looking at where we are and where we're going is by taking a brief look at the history of AI. It's actually been around, believe it or not, since the late 50s or so. So that's a lot of the early pioneers started thinking about this way back when. And in fact, actually, the real origins of AI go back to the Greek philosophers. They tried to, now obviously they didn't have computers. I'm not even sure if they had abacuses back then. They didn't really have any computing devices on to which to test their ideas. But so the origin of AI is logic, symbolic logic. The kinds of syllogisms that we see in Greek philosophy, like all men are mortal, Aristotle is a man. What can we conclude? Automatically, we conclude that Aristotle is also mortal. So that's a kind of very, very, very primitive AI. But very quickly, people realized that that wasn't going to be good enough. And most things that we look at in life, including 99.99% of things in the business world, are things that have uncertainty attached to them. We don't know. We don't have all the information. We don't know where things are going, and we don't know how to put it all together in order to make inferences about what's going to happen in the future. So that uncertainty leads to a whole different kind of approach. And that's primarily what those researchers were concerned with in the 60s and 70s, leading on from the 1950s. How do we reason with uncertainty? And it's an extremely difficult topic in and of itself. And by the way, it hasn't been solved. That's an ongoing area of research, although we're much better at it than we were certainly at the beginning. And of course, we have much more powerful computational hardware than they had back then, and certainly what they had in ancient Greek times, and in order to carry out various simulations and experiments to see if this is working.
You're talking late 60s, right? So that's where the computers were the size of a house.
Yeah, more or less. And you interacted with them with punch cards and you didn't even have a keyboard, right? And so actually, in Philadelphia, where AIR is located, the computer was so big at the University of Pennsylvania, it knocked out the electricity for the city for a couple hours.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So I'm not sure the exact date on that. I think that was probably early 60s or so. And of course, that computer had the computational power of, I would say, a flip phone. So we've seen advances in hardware, but we've also seen tremendous advances in software. And in particular, one of the things that people realized is that no matter how good we're going to get at reasoning, we can't possibly put all of the information that we need in the system. We need something that learns like human beings, or at least approximately like human beings, if we're going to be able to accommodate all of that information. So AI, in about the mid 80s, AI switched over to an emphasis on machine learning. So that was the second major development. So we go from AI 0.0, which is like logic, and then reasoning with uncertainty, and then to machine learning. And then
Okay.
and then from learning, we go to deep learning, which is really just we can go into the details, but it's not important. It's really just a better form of machine learning, right? So that was really popular up until about 5 years ago. So still ongoing, and it's still actually the basis of a lot of the things we do, including generative AI. So that's where
Okay.
we were approximately 3 or 4 years ago. We were concentrating on reasoning with uncertainty, and also reasoning whereby the models and the rules for that reasoning were not explicitly programmed in, but they were acquired by the machine itself just by looking at the data.
Okay.
Okay, then something strange happened, which everybody's familiar with, generative AI. They're at
Yeah.
least familiar with the effects of the results of generative AI, if not the mechanism behind it. And that's what we've been seeing. That's the roots of generative AI go way back. I mean, people were doing generative like things even back in the 70s, but it wasn't very big. And of course, it didn't have the computational power that we needed to do things like large language models, which look at enormous bodies of text in order to figure out what to say, right? So that's effectively where we are now. We're at the generative AI stage, and everybody is aware of the effects. We can summarize text, we can generate new text. Speaking of leadership, we can look at it, and in fact, we're actually doing this at AIIR Consulting. We're looking at an interview with a leader, and also 360 information, i.e., what other people are saying about them, and taking all of that text and summarizing that in an interesting way and giving it back, even many pages, lots of text, and we're summarizing that and giving a good overview of what that leader's strengths and areas of opportunities are. So their strengths essentially and their weaknesses, and we can do that by looking at their interview data and what other people are saying about them. So that's a good application for leadership, and that's precisely where we are now. And I think most of your listeners are probably familiar with many of the other similar kinds of advances. For example, typing in text and getting a picture, typing in a few notes off of the keyboard and getting a symphony. All kinds of things which are effectively completion tasks.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
all
if you look at,
generative AI is a kind of completion task.
I mean, if you look at it in the relation to leadership, you talked about it in the aspect of leadership selection, so to speak, right? Or, trying to get a better understanding who's going to be a good fit for a role. And, we do that through psychometric assessments, to your point, 360s. But now this extra added element, you could bring in AI to sift through that, to your point, too, the interviews, and really get a comprehensive overview of somebody from different perspectives, and sometimes digging into nuances, perhaps that, the machine picks up that maybe a human might not pick up.
Yeah. So there's two things really. I mean, one thing that we can do is we can use generative AI and AI in general in order to evaluate better what we have, especially not what's called non-structured data. So non-structured data is anything that's not in a nice spreadsheet, for example, right? So it's text, right? So we can look at text, and we can come up with some idea, for example, of the nature of the personality traits that person has,
Yep.
to some extent, their strengths, their organizational strengths, their social strengths, their strengths with respect to self-awareness and self-care, that sort of thing. We can get a good approximate idea just by having the AI read their text and look at what they're saying. But the other main thing is actually a more active approach, where we can redesign the assessment with the view of an AI evaluator in mind. So let me give
Huh.
you an example of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that we looked at very early on at AIIR Analytics was the ability of a leader to inspire, right? So a leader can come in and most leaders have some sort of cadence or some sort of interaction where every once in a while, whether it be 1 month or every week or so, come and give a little pep talk. Just just like pep talk that you would see for the big game coming up, right?
Yeah.
And some people are better than that at others. I mean, we have, throughout history, we have some brilliant examples. I mean, so two examples that come to mind were Churchill during the war, and
Yep.
then Martin Luther King during the civil rights movement. And if you look at those, look at those texts, you see a number of characteristics, which truly, for example, in Churchill's case, really sustained the British people during the War of Britain when they were being bombed almost on a nightly
Yeah.
basis. So but there were a number of things that you see, and actually you see a lot of those things, 20 years later with Martin Luther King when he was standing at the mall and giving his great speeches in Washington, not too far from about 5 miles from where I am right now. In any case, so it's a learned task. But the question is, what does it consist of? Now, the nice thing with current AIs is that we can point the AI in the direction of these inspirational talks and
Yeah.
get a result out of that and say, yes, this is why this is better. Person X is better than Y at being inspirational. And not only that, here's why. It can tell us why. So this is a tremendous advance in the assessment of leadership, these sorts of things, which go far beyond the normal kinds of surveys that leadership assessment is normally based on.
Yeah. And it also is a tremendous help. I mean, I used to do on-site leadership development workshops and do a lot of work out of assessments, but I would observe a lot. And basically I would take those observations about how inspirational, how motivational, how transformational somebody is and try to articulate that and put that in a summary. And sometimes that's tough, right? And sometimes you have to draw inferences to it. But AI sounds like it's a good companion in this aspect where you can say, hey, listen, analyze this. And you have this feeling too, as being a professional, right? You can hear somebody, observe somebody, and get those feelings. But now you really have this tool that can just come in and really kind of give a different type
Right.
of support.
I mean, I think, as humans, because of our evolutionary history, we instinctively know who's a leader and who's not. However, number one, we can't say why. We just say, oh yeah, that person feels more like a leader than somebody else. Number two, how do we transfer that to a machine? How do we get a machine to do that sort of evaluation? And perhaps I should also mention number three, we have to make sure that it's accurate, right? Just
Yeah.
because somebody seems like a leader doesn't mean they're going to be a great leader. I mean, there's the dark side problem. They could actually seem like a great leader, but actually be a demagogue and take either the corporation or the country down the wrong path.
Yeah. So it's in the toolbox, so to speak. There's different things that we do when we evaluate leadership. To your point, it's just another tool. It sounds like to look at and have that lens. And you take that with people's observations, their own colleagues and things like that. You put all this together, and then you have like I said, just another level of just looking at things and really try to understand. And to your point too, it could be something the machine might not be really good at it that the human might be. You can hear their tone a little bit. Well, maybe the machine may not pick up the tone. Your observation then comes in. His tone was actually, or her tone was actually on point.
There are things that you can do in order to sound more confident, in order to project more gravitas
Yeah.
in your speech. And those are the things that we can pick up on. And again, we have to be careful that those are not it's something that's truly indicative of a positive direction that the leader can take us as opposed to a negative direction. But we can definitely pick up on those things.
I mean, that's why we do assessments in the first place. Let's understand where we are. Because if
Right.
I understand
Right.
where I am, I can make a
Right.
plan to grow and adjust and be where I need to be.
Right.
That's
And
fascinating.
there are also some results that people can give a pretty good idea, not a perfect idea, just by looking at a picture of someone. They don't even have to open up their mouth. So people can predict who's going to win an election approximately 70% of the time just by looking at a picture of the candidates. So
Really?
that's a fascinating result in and of itself.
Hmm.
Again, it doesn't mean that person, once that person's elected, they're going to do a great job. But you can at least predict who people think will do a good job.
Well, yeah, I mean, that could be said of any leader, almost back to your point earlier. We put on our best face when we're trying to get into leadership positions and things like that and so on too. So yeah, it could lead to, but to your point, it is fascinating. Just, and this is where human beings are, right? To that point, we look at things, we
Right.
make an assessment, but is that really indicative of a data assessment or is that a gut assessment? And then even looking at
Yeah.
AI can cut through some of those gut assessments in many respects and say, well,
Right. In our
this
case,
is what we're seeing.
it often is a gut assessment, and for good or for ill, that could be automated. That gut assessment. And there's a fundamental principle of psychology which states that if something is has a statistical regularity about it, it's something real, even
Hmm.
though it might be very nebulous, it might be very hard to define. So if we have that gut instinct, that means it's in principle possible for an AI to also have that gut instinct.
Hmm. And that's, yeah, it's interesting in that respect. We just talked a little bit about, how leadership is going to get impacted in the aspect of selection and how leaders might get feedback and learn to grow in their practice. But, leadership itself seems like has to evolve with technology. So I got to imagine, like, as this evolution in AI, grows and there's different things to do with it, you know, how do you envision that AI is going to reshape the way we think about leadership?
First thing we really talked about was the assessment process,
Yeah.
which is extremely important. For especially for succession, especially when you're looking at the C-suite. I would say I would say it's incomputable. It's almost it's something which is you couldn't even put it on. You'd say it's 57%, but it's so important. So assessment's extremely important, but another area which is extremely important, and lots of people are starting to talk about this, is the idea of a digital assistant. What really we should call it an AI assistant, or even if you like an avatar or a bot. This is something that will go beyond just scheduling the meetings for next week. Between the kinds of things that we have now and the kinds of things that will actually be able to give advice about advanced topics, about hiring and firing, for example, about important decisions, about even up to and possibly including the strategic vision of the company. Where should the organization be in 3 to 5 years? Now, how will it do that? The advantages are clear. What are AIs good at, and what are computers good at? So it turns out that computers are very good at things that we're not good at, and vice versa, right? That's also a fundamental principle of AI. And so one of the things they're very good at is digesting large amounts of information. So there's many aspects of the construction of a strategic vision. Probably one of the most important is to understand where the market is currently. What is the competitive landscape?
Yeah.
What does the competitive landscape consist of? It consists of a large number of other organizations, plus all sorts of other things that people are saying in the media, and even things that people are tweeting about. And in addition to that, an understanding of the technology itself, or whatever space you happen to be in, and where it could possibly go in the future. So integrating all of that information is a tremendously difficult thing, and it's very easy to have blinders on, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they create a narrative and say, and that narrative, by the way, is often going to be influenced by what you're doing, right? So it's not a non-biased narrative, right? So you're creating a narrative, and it's not going to be a bias-free narrative, and that's going to lead to limitations. Your AI assistant could possibly go beyond those limitations. First of all, it's not going to necessarily AI, as we know, can be biased, but probably not going to be as biased as you are, and it's also going to be able to digest much more information, and bring in many more strands of reasoning in informing its judgment about the strategic vision of the company, right? So that's I think I think that's one fundamental area that we're headed in. Now we're not there yet.
As you talk about it, I'm going to myself. If I'm the CEO, I'm like, is Bruce telling me to go to Chat GPT right now and type in, "I need my strategic vision,"
Right,
or
that's what I was just about to say. We're not, yeah, you could do that, and you're gonna get a very vague anodyne answer. It's not going to, you know, you know, anything about, if you type anything in the chat GPT about the future, I mean, it's really essentially just digesting large amounts of what other people are saying.
Yeah.
By definition, a, a strategic vision is about going where other people have not gone before, right?
Okay.
So if
Yeah.
you're going where
True.
somebody hasn't gone before, nobody's written about it. So no matter how much information ChatGPT digests, it's not going to be able to come up with. So this is a little bit of a future thing. This is something coming, I think, within the 3 to 5 years. We're not quite there yet.
Is this something where the organization would have to make their own learning model in order to do this, the learning language model?
See, the way I can see of it is this. Originally, I was doing a lot of work with the IoT, Internet of Things. So one of the things I came up with was the idea of the factory as an organism. IoT is about machines and why they break, and and predictive analytics with respect to the parts, and then also things like productivity of the factory as a whole. So you can think of a factory as if you like, as a living, breathing organism, right? Where
Yeah.
certain things come in and certain things come out, right? And on some factories are more efficient, some than others. Other factories break down completely. Sometimes the assembly line gets halted completely and it could be just because of very minor uh, uh, breakdown in a machine, or lack of a part, or even human elements. What we can think about is the organization as an organism. So I call that the Origorga model, right?
Okay.
Because organ, both organization, organism. The ideal AI assistant will be doing a lot of the same things that the analytics department is currently doing in an organization. But in addition, be able to communicate with the CEO or member of the C-suite in a natural language way, and in addition, be able to integrate much more sources of information that an AI could possibly, just by sitting in the organization, watching everything that's going on, digesting all sorts of information, it has the capability of being better than that analytics department itself.
And it
And
also
that
sounds like it could be quicker. Like, if I have a follow-up question as a CEO, I can ask it right to my AI assistant. It might have the information at the ready instead of Bob, an accountant, going, I got to get back to you in a half hour because I got to figure that out.
going to be virtually sitting in the organization, watching everything that's going on, including some very basic things that the analytics department is already doing. Analytics department is already looking at sales, and it's asking questions like, our sales are down in the Midwest past quarter, and we want to know why, right? And so we form a machine learning model which tells us, ideally, what happened. Maybe it had
Hmm.
something to do with the weather. Maybe it had something to do with the supply chain. Maybe there's something about something shifted in the preferences of people that live in that area. So the analytics department is already doing that. The
Yeah.
idea is, however, is that does not need to be uh, we're not going to eliminate people entirely, but that does not need to be driven primarily by human beings in at least over the next 3 to 5 years. We're going to see that as a separate analytic assistant who's looking at the organism as a whole, so to speak, and figuring out what's going on wrong, what's working, and what's not working. And that thing is going to be tremendously valuable to the CEO and other members of the C-suite.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that ties back to, some of the stats we heard that some workers may be displaced because of AI. It sounds like natural things. It is trade-offs, right? Yes, there may be some displacement, but if we look at it from that leader's perspective, right? I've got this powerful tool right now that can give me real-time data that's piped into different parts of the organization. I can dig deeper sometimes with inquiries to get different information. And to your point, I still need teams to build these models to better understand how things are happening in the marketplace and things like that. But now it's just we're kind of supercharging the information we're getting, and we can be more actionable with it in a more timely fashion. Instead of, to your observation earlier, it could take a few weeks for a new analysis report, right? Now I can get
Right.
that data like soon, and now I can act on it. So just because market share went down in Akron and Ohio, I don't have to wait a month to figure out why. I might be able to figure that out sooner, respond to it, and level out wherever that may have potentially gone in that respect. So AI sounds like it's going to have multiple ways that it's going to impact leadership, not just from selection, but also making their lives easier in some respect.
Yeah, that's right. And it's dangerous. What I'm about to say can be dangerous, but of course it's dangerous to let people make decisions too. I mean, so eventually, and this gets to your point about the buggy whips. Eventually, AIs are not just going to make the decisions, but they're going to carry them out. In which case, the humans are going to be completely out of the loop. Now, this is a different time frame we're talking about here. Instead of 3 to 5 years, we're talking about 10 to 20 years. We're talking about complete displacement. Tremendous amount of talk out there about AI, but one thing that almost everybody agrees, and I also agree with this, which is that in the near future, at least, AIs are going to be complementary to humans. So it's going to be the combination, the AI human combination is really where it's going to, really what we have to focus on in the near term. There's going to be a whole new aspect of leadership, which is not how well you interact with human beings, but how well you interact with machines and how well you interact with this digital assistant. Certain people will be better than others. Now, in the case of ChatGPT, for example, we have a thing called prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is asking the right question to the large language model in order for it to get the response that you're actually looking for, and it's non-trivial. There's this new field for prompt engineering, and you can just get hired to do that full time. Some people are going to be better at interacting. That human AI pair, can be more or less productive. And that's another skill that, on top of all in our framework, we have 45 unique skills. There's going to be another skill, or at least a set of skills, which is human machine interaction. How well are you able to get the machine to do things that you want it to do?
If I'm looking at it from the perspective of a leader, right, we're always looking to heighten our cognitive abilities. So,
Right.
Using AI in this way, I just give myself that much more of an advantage, or, at least an opportunity to get a deeper understanding or ask different questions. But to your point, like, how do I ask it the right way? My old mentor used to say computer program. I'm not going to say he the way he say it, but he'd say poop in, poop out. If you
Right.
don't put the right information out in, you're not get the right information out. And it seems the same way with AI. I can ask a question, but if the more refined, the more, more I'm trying to understand, the more I give it, the more I have the potential to
Right.
get from it. So that's it
Right.
sounds like that new skill you're talking
Yeah,
about is
it
how do I
is
do
too.
that?
It's almost the same thing. There is more. Eventually, there's going to be more margin of error, though. I mean, it's not. You know, if we're talking about interacting with a truly intelligent device, then it should be able to not only do what you say, but interpret what your underlying intention is, right? But still, you have to convey that. That in itself is, in the short to medium term, is going to be non-trivial. How you interact, how you express your intention, and that will affect the kinds of results that you get.
I mean, for leaders out there right now that are like somewhat apprehensive about AI, or they may be concerned about, what is it really doing? It sounds like it's an opportunity to AI's here right now. It sounds like it's here to stay. It sounds like we got to get a little more comfortable with it. How can leaders really start to build their understanding of AI just in general so they can build up their comfortability, because it is going to be such a powerful tool
You
that
know,
they can utilize.
AI is fundamentally changing the nature of the game, and in such a way that it's not going to go away, and in such a way that it's going to be difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen in the future. So, yeah, it's definitely a game changer. It's not. It's at this point, it's not. It's. I do believe there's going to be, typically with the advent of new technology, there's a period in which there's a small period of disappointment before it really takes off. First of all, that's going to be solved. Secondly, that's a relatively minor problem. So AI is definitely here to stay, and as leaders, leaders will have to be able to adapt to that. There is no choice. Now, how to do that? That's not easy. But what I always stress is fundamentals. In other words,
Fair.
don't try to understand a particular technology in detail, or a particular app. Try to understand the fundamentals of what it's doing, how it's doing it, how it works, and why, for example, it might not be able to do the kinds of things that you want it to do.
Bruce, before I appreciate your time today. And before we go, is there any parting advice you have to leaders on, AI, looking at it, understanding it, trying to better grasp what they can achieve through it?
I would try to understand the theory as opposed to the apps, because that will tell you a number of different things. It will tell you the limitations. It will also give you some idea of where things could possibly go and why we're not there yet. So AI is still a little far away from understanding why people do what they do and why the world works the way it works. And you can see that in generative AI. So if the leader looks at generative AI, not as an app, but as what the theoretical foundations, they'll understand this. Oh, it can do this, but it can't do that yet. I can use it for this. I can tell, I don't have to use it myself. I can tell other people, oh, go build a report, go summarize these 100 pages of text. You understand why it can do that. On the other hand, if you wanted to do something more complicated, like as we said, build a strategic vision. So as a leader, you have to understand what can be done and why it can be done, and then you'll be able to best use the technology.
Awesome, Bruce. Again, thanks for joining us today, everyone. We had Bruce Katz here today talking to us about AI, its impact on leadership. I want to thank everybody for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on future episodes. To discover more about AIR and how we empower leaders to navigate change and shape a better future, we invite you to explore our resources and insights. Visit us at airconsulting.com. That's airconsulting.com. Again, Bruce, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.